Imagine a man who managed to bring the world's most powerful country to its knees. A figure whose very name still sends shivers down the spine of nations. How did a man born into a wealthy family in Saudi Arabia become the mastermind behind one of the deadliest attacks in modern history? This is the story of Osama bin Laden, a story of privilege, radical beliefs, and the path to global infamy. Osama bin Laden was born on March 10, 1957, in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. He came from a large, wealthy family. His father, Mohammed bin Laden, was a billionaire businessman and construction magnate with strong ties to the Saudi royal family. Osama was the 17th of 52 children, growing up in a life of comfort and luxury. The bin Laden family was well known and respected in Saudi Arabia, and their wealth allowed Osama access to the best education and resources. Early life and education. As a child, Osama attended elite schools. He showed a strong interest in religion, particularly in the teachings of Islam. Even though he could have followed the path of business like his father, young Osama had different ideas. His religious beliefs became increasingly radical as he grew older. This was during a time when the world, particularly the Middle East, was undergoing political changes. The Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, and Muslims around the world saw this as a threat to their faith. Bin Laden, like many others, viewed the Soviet invasion as an attack on Islam. He was inspired by Islamic scholars who preached the importance of defending their religion through jihad, which means struggle or holy war. But for bin Laden, this struggle took on a very literal meaning. The call to jihad. Afghanistan. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, sparking a 10-year war. Osama bin Laden saw this as a calling. Although he had no military experience, he decided to join the fight against the Soviets. He moved to Pakistan, where he provided funding, weapons, and resources to the Afghan Mujahideen, resistance fighters. At first, bin Laden's role was more about logistics, helping to supply the fighters with what they needed. But over time, he became more involved in the actual fighting. This experience would shape him into a leader of radical jihadists. During the 1980s, the United States, seeing the Soviet Union as its enemy, also supported the Afghan Mujahideen. Bin Laden worked closely with these fighters, who would later form the core of the Taliban and al-Qaeda. At this point, bin Laden was not yet an enemy of the US. In fact, many in the West saw him as a hero for helping to fight the Soviets. The rise of al-Qaeda. After the Soviet Union withdrew from Afghanistan in 1989, bin Laden returned to Saudi Arabia. However, his experiences in Afghanistan had changed him. He believed that Muslims should continue their fight against any foreign influence in the Islamic world. It was during this time that he founded al-Qaeda, meaning the base. Al-Qaeda was more than just a group of fighters, it was an organization with a radical mission, to spread jihad across the world. At first, bin Laden's focus was on local conflicts, particularly in the Middle East. He believed that the Muslim world should be ruled by strict Islamic law, and he opposed any government or foreign power that did not align with his vision. In 1990, when Iraq, led by Saddam Hussein, invaded Kuwait, the Saudi government allowed American troops to be stationed in Saudi Arabia to defend the kingdom. This decision enraged bin Laden. He saw the presence of US troops on Saudi soil as a violation of Islamic Holy Land. From that moment on, bin Laden turned against the United States. Exile and declaration of war. In 1991, after openly criticizing the Saudi government, Osama bin Laden was exiled from Saudi Arabia. He moved to Sudan, where he began to build up al-Qaeda. During his time in Sudan, bin Laden established training camps, developed international networks, and began plotting attacks against US interests. He became more vocal in his criticism of the US, calling for jihad against America and its allies. By the mid-1990s, bin Laden and al-Qaeda were linked to several attacks, including the bombing of the World Trade Center in 1993. In 1996, bin Laden issued a public declaration of war against the United States. He argued that it was the duty of every Muslim to fight against American influence in the Islamic world. This declaration would eventually lead to one of the most devastating events in modern history: the 9/11 attacks. The world changed forever on September 11, 2001. 19 al-Qaeda terrorists, under bin Laden's leadership, hijacked 4 airplanes. 2 planes crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City, 1 hit the Pentagon, and the 4th crashed in Pennsylvania after passengers fought back. Nearly 3,000 people were killed in the attacks. The 9/11 attacks were a turning point in world history. The U.S. responded with a war on terror, launching military campaigns in Afghanistan and later Iraq. Bin Laden became the most wanted man in the world, as the U.S. vowed to bring him to justice. The hunt for Osama bin Laden. After the 9/11 attacks, Osama bin Laden went into hiding. For years, intelligence agencies from around the world searched for him. He moved from place to place, avoiding capture by living in remote areas and relying on a network of supporters to protect him. Despite the efforts of the US and its allies, bin Laden managed to evade capture for nearly a decade. During this time, al-Qaeda continued to carry out terrorist attacks around the world. Bin Laden remained a symbol of resistance for jihadist groups, even though he was no longer directly leading many of the attacks. Operation Neptune Spear. After years of searching, the US finally tracked down Osama bin Laden. In 2011, US intelligence discovered that he was hiding in a compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan. President Barack Obama authorized a secret mission to capture or kill bin Laden. On May 2, 2011, a team of US Navy SEALs raided the compound. After a brief firefight, bin Laden was killed. His body was taken by the US military and buried at sea, according to Islamic tradition. The legacy of Osama bin Laden. Even after his death, the legacy of Osama bin Laden continues to shape global politics. Al-Qaeda remains active, although its power has diminished. Bin Laden's death was a major victory for the US, but the fight against terrorism is far from over. Osama bin Laden's story is one of privilege, power, and radicalization. His actions changed the world, and his legacy is a reminder of the devastating consequences of extremism. Thank you for watching this documentary on the life of Osama bin Laden. If you found this story insightful, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more documentaries on historical figures who changed the world. Stay tuned for more compelling stories.